red, black and gold. The cheapest meat in the market is black meat. Sings brilliantly one of the greatest voices of Brazilian music. Actually, the greatest. Elza Soares.
A carne mais barata do mercado é a carne negra.
Welcome back to Ember Land, and let's talk about blood, fire, and love. 1808. In today's episode, the stinky glutton king who foolish Napoleon, the Spanish queen of more than 1,000 lovers, and the African blood that marks the pages of the Brazilian history. Let's go. Wait. Before starting, a little pause for our sponsors. Oh, that's true, I have known yet. So please, hit the like, share and comment a beautiful thing in the video. The cheapest meat in the market is black meat, so sings one of the greatest voices of Brazilian music, Elza Soares. Brazil, the last country in the Americas to finally abolish slavery. And yet, the brutal legacy of that dark chapter echoes louder than ever. It's as if Brazil never truly liberated its enslaved people, only rebranded the oppression for modern times. Slavery was abolished on paper, but the stain of it lingers in the daily lives of a society where over 55% of the population is of African descent. And yet, look at who still pays the highest price. Just some numbers to clarify, 71% of the prison population is black. Afro-Brazilians also make up 64% of the unemployed, as if they're somehow still paying for the crime of existing in a system that was designed to crush them. And of course, if we're going to get murdered in Brazil, there's a good chance it will be because of the color of skin. 71% of homicide victims are black. But sure, let's keep pretending that slavery is a thing of the past, a dusty chapter in history books. Meanwhile, the present screams with inequality so loud, it's deafening. But only if you are willing to listen.
Aqui estou mais dia, sob o olhar sanguinário do vigia. Você não sabe como é caminhar com a cabeça na mira de uma HK. Metralhador alemã, o de Israel, estraçalha ladrão que nem papel. Na muralha em pé.
Black people made nothing but fundamental contributions to Brazilian society, shaping its culture, religion, music, cuisine, and more. No black, no samba. No axé, no maracatu or capoeira. No black, no macumba, candomblé. No black, no vatapá, carajé, feijoada. No black, no Pelé, Elza Soares, Cartola, Jorge Ben, Machado, Gama, and on and on and on. When the Portuguese arrived in Brazil in 1500, they initially sought to enslave the indigenous peoples to work on their sugarcane plantations, besides stealing, raping, and decimating them. However, due to resistance, high mortality from European diseases, and familiarity with the terrain which allowed indigenous people to escape, the Portuguese began turning to the African slave trade. By the mid-16th century, Brazil became a focal point of the transatlantic slave trade. The Portuguese crown heavily relied on the forced labor of enslaved Africans to develop its Brazilian colony. Over the centuries, Brazil imported more enslaved Africans than any other country in the Americas, nearly 4.8 million, accounting for about 40% of all slaves brought to the New World. The expansion of slavery during the 1600s and 1700s in Brazil was primarily fueled by sugarcane plantations in the Northeast, which created an immense demand for labor. Sugar was Brazil's most important export in the 16th and 17th centuries, and the brutal conditions in which enslaved Africans were forced to work led to high mortality rates. These laborers lived in appalling conditions, subject to physical punishment, malnutrition, and rampant disease. Rapadura is a Brazilian traditional sweet made of sugar cane, hard as rock, sweeter than sugar. We have a saying, rapadura is sweet, but it's not soft at all. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, gold and diamond discoveries in Minas Gerais, a state of Brazil, aka best Brazilian place for eating truly good, home of pão de queijo, Minas cheese, doce de leite, and also best coffee in the world, Minas Gerais shifted the demand for enslaved Africans from the plantations to the mines, and this gold rush further intensified the slave trade, and the enslaved workforce expanded into new regions, cementing slavery as a cornerstone of Brazil's economy. By the early 19th century, coffee plantations began to dominate the Brazilian economy, especially in the southeastern region around Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. Coffee cultivation was extremely labor-intensive, and it required constant influx of enslaved labor. Despite international pressure to end the slave trade, Britain banned the transatlantic slave trade in 1807, Brazil continued importing enslaved Africans illegally and for decades, even after signing treaties to halt the trade in 1826. However, this period is especially interesting, kind of funny to address due to the fact that by then there were interesting Portuguese figures of Brazil history, specifically in 1808. And those figures are the stinky glutton king who foolish Napoleon, Dom João VI, or Sexto, his beloved queen, actually full of hatred and anger to the Ember land, Carlota Joaquina, and the whole Portuguese court, all of them encrusted in Brazil just because of a special middle-height man, Napoleon. Let's get into this. Picture it, King João VI, a man who looked like he'd had won too many royal banquets, sometimes even a full meal inside of pockets of his jacket, had to pack up his entire family and court and assorted psychopaths, about 10,000 people, and hightail it across the Atlantic. The reason? Well, Napoleon had effectively told Portugal, join my continental blockade against England, or I will liberate you into the ground. Portugal refused, preferring English tea to French arrogance, and Napoleon responded by sending an army. So, rather than face the consequences like any self-respecting monarch, King João did what any rational person would do. He abandoned ship, his entire country in fact, and booked an extended vacation to sunny Brazil. In 1808, the royal family of Portugal didn't exactly relocate to Brazil, more like they hightailed it across the Atlantic. With planes still a distant dream and their dignity left behind in Europe, they boarded ships in what can only be described as the fanciest game of let's get out of here before things get worse. And who, you ask, were they so desperately trying to escape from? None other than Napoleon Bonaparte, a man so lacking in charm, and let's be honest, height. Naturally, this was an unprecedented event in world history. A European monarch literally ran away from Europe. The Portuguese people left behind to deal with the chaos were likely less than thrilled. They'd been invaded by the French and deserted by their king. Meanwhile, João and his family were setting up shop in tropical Brazil, far away from the mess they'd helped create. Carlota Joaquina of Spain was quite possibly the original inspiration for every evil queen trope you've ever encountered. She was the wife of King João VI of Portugal, but the term of wife here is used loosely. Think of their marriage as less romantic partnership and more political hostage situation. Born into Spanish royalty, Carlota was shipped off to Portugal at the tender age of 10 to marry João. João, a man who could charitably be described as deeply charismatic. He was about as decisive as soggy biscuit, and that probably didn't help the already abysmal chemistry between them. Legend has it she found him repulsive, so much so that she would wash herself with vinegar after sharing a bed with him, which is pretty reasonable and which tells you everything you need to know about their love life. It's a wonder they had so many children, though historians speculate João might not have been the only man Carlota was tolerating. When Carlota landed in Brazil in 1808, she and her ladies weren't exactly the picture of royal glamour. Instead, they were crawling with lice, so much so that they had to shave their heads and wrap themselves in turbans, making them look less European aristocracy and more like they were auditioning for a play ward. Naturally, this didn't do wonders for Carlota's feelings toward Brazil, which she despised on sight. But irony has a funny way of working. The very look she adopted out of necessity, lice-infested chic, instantly became a trending hero. Soon, everyone was dressing like the Portuguese court. Women flaunting turbans and even mimicking the nobles' accents. And because fate loves a good joke, bites of that fashion sense still lingered in Rio de Janeiro today. Examples of it is the Carioca accent, pretty much based in the Portuguese court of 1808, which was trying to mimic the French chic accent into Portuguese as well. So, well, I gotta introduce you guys one of the best podcasters there is. Vitor Soares, the greatest master of history of Brazil. And he's bringing us some examples of the Carioca accent from Rio de Janeiro.
Salve, Emberland! Eu sou o Vitor Soares. História, escola, mesmo, biscoito, pastel, 3, pães, isqueiro, cariocas, português. Salve, Emberland!
Salve, Vitor! Thank you so much. And people, follow História em Meia Hora. Also, História pros brother and Vitor Soares wherever you can. He's the best. Thank you. First off, the Portuguese of 1808 opened Brazil's ports to international trade, which sounds like a big win, right? Sure, if you ignore the fact that they were basically doing it because they had no other choice. Napoleon's little tantrum in Europe had isolated Portugal. So João was like, hey Brazil, do you know that one-sided economic relationship we've had where you send us everything and we give you nothing? Well, now you got to trade with everyone. Brazil finally got to taste goods from all over the world. Thanks, Napoleon. And João VI, of course, looked like a genius for opening up trade when, in reality, the guy was just trying to avoid bankruptcy while lounging on beaches of Rio. And let's not forget the brilliant cultural boost the royal family brought with them. With one swoop, Rio de Janeiro went from tropical black water to the impromptu capital of an empire. Libraries, printing presses, and cultural institutions sprouted up, not because João VI was some kind of Renaissance visionary, but because he and his novels needed something to do between meals. So yes, Brazil suddenly had access to books and ideas, and civilization. But only because the royals didn't want to live in a place with no opera. Just because of this. The Portuguese crown, having treated Brazil as little more than a giant farm for centuries, was now trying to make it seem like it cared. Sure, we ignored you for 300 years, but now we've brought culture. Look at this library. We totally didn't build just to distract ourselves. No. The crown also established the Bank of Brazil in 1808. That's right. They started modernizing the economy because it's hard to keep an empire running on cocoa and sugar alone. The bank was a nice touch, although one suspects it was created less for Brazil's benefit and more because João needed a big bank for his lavish spending habits. But hey, financial infrastructure is financial infrastructure, even if it was designed to keep the royal swimming in imported goods and luxury. The changes didn't stop there. João also allowed local manufacturing. How generous of him to let the colonials start making their own stuff. Centuries after Europe had already perfected the concept of industries. Oh, and let's not forget the crown's stellar efforts in public administration and in government reform. King João, imported European bureaucrats to Brazil because clearly the locals weren't competent enough to run things right. Nothing says, I believe in you, like parachuting a bunch of paper pushers from Lisbon to tell the Brazilians how to run their own land. Ember. But let's give credit where it's due. This move helped centralize power, making Brazil a bit more than just a loose collection of tropical plantations. So yes, the Portuguese crown's arrival in Brazil brought many positive changes. Just ignore the fact that every one of them was done out of sheer necessity, and none of it would have happened if Napoleon hadn't scared the royal family into hopping on a boat. Let's also overlook the tiny detail that these improvements were mostly for the benefit of the crown and the nobility, with Brazil being the fortunate beneficiary of the royal need for distraction. The royal family's arrival in 1808 transformed Brazil into something almost resembling a functioning country. But only because the alternative was them languishing some forgotten corner of Lisbon while Napoleon turned Europe into his personal playground. You're welcome, Brasil.
país tropical, abençoado por Deus e bonito por natureza. Em fevereiro tem carnaval.
Eventually, the Portuguese royal family returns to Portugal, leaving their roots in the Umberland. Dom Pedro I, our Libertor, the dashing and impulsive Portuguese prince, son of the power couple João and Carlota, became Brazil's first in power in 1822 after famously declaring independence from his dad's empire with all the grace of a teenager slamming his bedroom door. And his beautiful and intelligent wife, really beautiful and intelligent wife, Empress Leopoldina, who actually had the brains in the relationship, did most of the heavy lifting, politically and emotionally, while Pedro ran around chasing mistresses and occasionally pretending to govern. Going a little bit back to Carlota Joaquina, our beloved queen, in her later years, she lived in a palace outside of Lisbon, where she could terrorize the household staff and avoid any actual governing responsibilities. João, for his part, tolerated her, possibly because it was easier than actively dealing with the drama. When João finally died in 1826, Carlota's political ambitions were over, though she probably spent her last years brooding over the fact that she never got her hands on the Spanish crown or her very own empire. She died in 1830, leaving behind a legacy of pettiness, betrayal, and a collection of increasingly unflattering portraits. And the famous Grito do Ipiranga, where Dom Pedro I supposedly declared Brazil's independence with the dramatic cry of Independência ou Morte, independence or death. A scene so heroic it's practically begging for a movie adaptation. Except, like most legends, this one's a bit embellished. In reality, Pedro was on a horseback suffering from a bad case of dysentery after a long, uncomfortable journey. So instead of an inspiring speech, it was more likely a half-hearted murmur in between bathroom breaks.
Aqui é o Brasil.
As for Brazil's independence, it was a glorious moment of freedom. Well, for everyone except the enslaved population, who made up most of the workforce. While Pedro shouted about liberty, millions of enslaved Africans were still being worked to death in the sugar fields and mines. Because why rush the whole freedom thing, right? Resistance and abolition movements. Throughout the history of slavery in Brazil, enslaved Africans resisted in various ways. There were frequent uprisings, rebellions, and escapes. Quilombos, or runaway slave communities, were established in remote areas, with the most famous being Quilombo dos Palmares, which survived for nearly a century before being destroyed by the colonial government. In the 19th century, Brazil saw the rise of abolitionist movements, which gained momentum from both Afro-Brazilian activists and European educated intellectuals. The international community, particularly the British, applied economic and political pressure on Brazil to end the slave trade. By 1850, the Lei Eusébio de Queiroz was passed, formally banning the importation of enslaved Africans, though slavery itself continued. The abolition finally happened between 1870s and 1888. The final push toward abolition came through gradual reforms. In 1871, the Lei do Ventre Livre, law of rebirth, declared that children born to enslaved mothers would be considered free. In 1885, the Lei dos Sexagenários, law of the 60-year-olds, freed enslaved people over the age of 60, though so few lived that long due to the harsh conditions. Abolition came slowly, but the movement gained strength from both national and international pressures, as well as revolts by enslaved Africans and growing unrest among Afro-Brazilian communities. Finally, on May 13th, 1888, Princess Isabel, great-granddaughter of the Glutton King, finally signed the Lei Áurea, Golden Law, which abolished slavery in Brazil without any form of reparations or compensation for the formerly enslaved. Red, black and gold. Now you tell me, why is the Brazilian flag green, yellow and blue, huh? Just because it's the color of the House of Bragança, this Portuguese family, the Portuguese colonizer, their identity, the former kingdom and empire. No, sorry, Brazil is red, is the Ember land. And black. Black people made profound contributions to Brazilian society, shaping its culture, religion, music, cuisines, and everything. So, thank you, Zumbi dos Palmares, Luiz Gama, Machado de Assis, Abdias do Nascimento, Tia Seata, André Rebouças, Maria Firmina dos Reis, João Cândido, Marielle Franco, Aleijadinho, Chica da Silva, Milton Santos, Lélia Gonzalez, Carolina Maria de Jesus, Benedita da Silva, Mãe Menininha do Cantóis, Dragão do Mar, Clementina de Jesus, Grande Otelo, Beatriz Nascimento, Gilberto Gil, Elza Soares, Jorge Benjor, Clara Nunes, Alcione Martinho da Vila, Milton Nascimento, Seu Jorge Tim Maia, Margarete Menezes, Zeca Pagodinho, Djavan, Maria Bethânia e Jonga. This list reflects unique and influential Afro-Brazilian personalities across various areas, across the time. Thank you so much for listening to Emberland. I hope to see you soon. Like, comment, and share it, please. Next episode, the snake's gonna smoke.